Okay, welcome to Nuts and Bolts of New Ventures. This is session 2 of 6 sessions. Last session, I gave you an introduction to a framework for the kind of questions that you as an entrepreneur need to ask yourself and figure out for any venture you're going after, and in fact, even if you want to go after a venture. With that framework, we said there are a whole bunch of questions that you need answers to. And the rest of the course is going to be helping you answer those questions or see what the issues are. So when Bob Jones came for the second part of this session last night, he addressed the issue of customers. And what is a customer? How do you find them? What are the key things to think about when you're trying to figure out what your product or service is and who wants it and all of that. So I think by and large, that covered a lot of, he got more out of that one session than I've seen anybody talk about customers anywhere, and I can see most of you agree with that. So tonight we move on, and once you have a customer, that's good, but the question is, and they value what you're doing, the question is, how are you going to get a sustainable business out of it? And that, in many aspects, is the business model. What is the model by which you're going to deliver the value to the customer, whoever you've identified. And that's Rich Kivel, who's going to talk to us about business models. I've known Rich for many more years than either of us would like to remember. But he's done this section for a number of years here. And, I haven't seen him actually in person for 3 years because of COVID. So I'm going to let him introduce and update everyone about what you're doing. And we'll go from there. Thank you, Rich.
Great. Joe, thank you so much. Good. Can everybody hear me okay? Great. Thank you all. It's fun to be back here. In fact, I love this room. Usually we're in 10250 for this, but I really love this place. And, my background, just I guess to put a sort of frame of reference around my interest in speaking about this topic is my background is actually as an entrepreneur. So in sales and marketing, and then leading a number of companies as CEO or chief operating officer, and then board roles. But my career really just started in tech. So a very long time ago, it was software and databases and networks, long before they used the term big data. And my very first CEO role was actually as CEO of a company that came out of the MIT entrepreneurship competition. It was a company called Molecularware. And this company was doing something really interesting. This is in the 90s. This is a company that was identifying essentially ways to connect a whole series of instruments in a laboratory environment so they would all talk to each other. So Molecularware started very, very, very late 99, I guess it's when it came out of the business plan competition. I joined the company in 2001. I was put in place as CEO by the investors, most of which were based out of London. And our goal was basically to figure out how do we commercialize this new thing called bioinformatics, which today is just a normal term many of us use as we think about sort of the combination of data and analytics and healthcare and drug discovery. And we had a very complicated product. This product was one that we not only sold directly to the end user, which in many cases were research institutes. They were like the MIT Whitehead Institute. Also commercial institutes that were doing research, like the old Millennium Pharmaceuticals. But we also had to figure out how to enter a series of other markets. Without boring you with all the details around that particular product, we recognized that we had an opportunity to sell into different channels. So essentially, we were inventing the business model as we went along. Direct sales is one channel that we'll talk about today. Indirect sales can take many, many forms, such as being installed on someone else's instrument or someone else's hardware. And also, you can wind up using distributors and partners. So we'll talk about these things today. But my experience is real life experience in actually building and selling companies originally in the United States, and a majority of the past 15 plus years of my life has been spent in the UK and Europe, building and commercializing technology and taking companies into international markets. So let's start off, I guess, with a foundation. So, when you think about sort of a business model, there's a lot of definitions. I think we could probably say that everybody here could write their own definition. But at the end of the day, if you're part of a leadership team of a company that's got a product, you have to think about what exactly is the way that this product will capture value. Successful companies have business models that will allow them to attract, retain, create repeat customers. And it's not as simple as just saying we're going to put it on the internet, right? Or we're going to put it on store shelves. So the business model becomes really unique. And what's also kind of crazy is, as you know, as a consumer, finding the business model for a particular product isn't as easy as looking at your competitors. Because you could look at anything that you're currently involved with as a consumer, right? You're buying a new watch, you're buying a new blouse or a sweater, you're buying a new laptop, you're buying a new car. There's not a single business model that fits any one of those industry sectors. Some of them are online, some of them are direct to the consumer, some of them are a combination of all of those things. I mean, think about companies that we've seen become incredibly successful on a basis of disintermediation of all of the middlemen. Companies like Warby Parker, as an example. Who here knows Warby Parker? One of the leading eyeglass sellers. Warby Parker essentially took an industry that was very old-fashioned. Nothing had changed in the eyeglass industry in probably 50 or 60 years. You went to the mall, you walked into LensCrafters, you got a prescription, you then walked around and looked at all of these glasses, frames on the wall, you picked the one you want, you came back in a few weeks and you picked up your new pair of glasses. Warby Parker said, this is kind of nuts. Why can't people try glasses on at home and they just email us the prescription that was approved by their doctor? And they can try on 2, 3, 4, 10 pairs of glasses, and all they have to do is return them to us. And then they pick the one that they want, and we send it back to them. They upended that entire industry. They changed the way people think about buying glasses. And then the funny part is, after they became essentially a unicorn company, by taking an entirely different business model than any other eyeglass company before them, now you can walk through the Prudential Center Mall in Boston and you can walk into a Warby Parker. You could be on Fifth Avenue in New York and walk into a Warby Parker, and it's mind-bending. You think, wait a minute, wasn't your value proposition that you didn't have bricks and mortar? You weren't paying $65,000 a month for rent in a fancy mall, plus 6 employees and insurance, et cetera, et cetera. How did that change? So you can see that they chose a business model and then they continued to iterate over time. And we'll use some other examples there. So just to stimulate your thinking, think about yourselves as consumers, think about the things that you've purchased, think about the different ways that you can actually purchase them. So at the end of the day, what you want to do is you want to deliver value to the clients. That's a no-brainer. You want to create value for those clients and future clients. And then you want to capture a piece of the market that you truly believe you own. Every industry is different. Think about buying a car 5 years ago, 8 years ago, 15 years ago. You went to a car dealership, you walked in, you looked at their inventory, you possibly took a car for a ride, maybe you took a few of them for a ride, you compared it to a number of other, perhaps car dealerships in the area. You might even have gone on the internet and you might have looked at KBB.com, Kelley Blue Book, and you might have said, okay, am I really paying a fair price for this car based on the data available? Or maybe you went on to Auto Trader and you can see other car dealers or individuals selling the car. But if you think about it, the model was really not changed. You essentially were still going someplace to test drive, touch, feel a car, and then that industry changed dramatically. Carvana as one example of many. You literally buy a car online, there's no negotiating with a salesperson, there's no talking to anyone. They send you up-to-date pictures on the vehicle, every blemish, scratch, nick, anything that's wrong with the vehicle you're fully aware of, the miles, the interior, the tires, the brakes, everything is available to you. You have an overload of information. You buy the car, it shows up at your house. That's unbelievable. I mean, to think about that, we're not talking about books here. We're talking about a car. And they'll also deal with the registration, the insurance, all of those things for you. And you never once had to get out of your house, get into your car, and drive to 6 different dealers, deal with 6 really usually annoying sales representatives who are all trying to high pressure you into buying a vehicle. So do you have that value captured? Are you able to actually attract people and ultimately deliver an experience that they say, I want to come back? So business model innovation is critical to developing a quality business, new markets, and driving profitability. The ability for, as we used initially, Warby Parker, to be able to deliver value, it was disintermediating that entire crazy value chain where I had to go to Lens Crafters or some other group in the mall, try on glasses, a fixed number of glasses were available from my view. If I went to one in Connecticut or I happened to be at a conference in California and I walked into the Lens Crafters there or whatever the eyeglass shop was there, it'd be a different inventory. So I knew I wasn't getting really the best at any given geolocation. Whereas Warby Parker said, no, this is crazy. You want a pair of glasses that is this particular color, shape, style, size, we can get that for you. We'll send them to your house, you try them on with clear lenses. If you fall in love with them, just send us your prescription and you're done. So the ability to change your business model is almost as important as choosing your business model initially. So let's talk about these things here. So when it comes to sort of an academic model, what are the things that we're hoping are part of our business model? What are the key components? If I said to a group of entrepreneurs at the MIT entrepreneurship competition, what is your product? Well, we're building this new device. It's going to completely transform the way that slides are shown in big conference rooms. You don't have to go back and forth and click your computer. It's going to be Bluetooth. Fantastic. We love the idea. How are you going to sell it to the customer? And what are the things you need to think about? Well, these are the 7 segments that we always think about. I mentioned that my background was sort of building and starting companies and getting hired by investors to run them. But now I've taken on a new role. So my role for the past number of years is I run a fund. It's called Gray Bella Capital. We invest in deep technology companies as well as health technology companies at the growth stage. So we're never the first capital in. We're coming in when these companies actually have a semblance of a business model. Maybe they actually have revenue. They have a product. So it isn't still at the ideation stage. They're not still dreaming about this idea. So we come in after the seed investors or the pre-Series A. We'll invest in Series A through probably Series C. We're focused very heavily outside the US. So Europe and elsewhere are very important to us. I spend most of my time in the UK, and our team is sprinkled around Europe. But when we talk to companies, we talk about this more than almost anything except the team. The team is number one. Who are you? What's your background? Why are you the right guys and girls to do this? Why are you the right team? And then we take a look at, let's talk about your product. Because I might see 6 companies in 1 year that are all doing drones. I might see 17 companies in 1 year that are doing a new diagnostic for prediction of cancer, different kinds of cancers. I might see 10 companies that are doing something new in the area of robotics. So how do I differentiate them as an investor? Let's imagine that all of those companies have really great teams, super smart, highly motivated people that want to transform the world, that want to have an impact. One of the differentiating factors if you're building a business is what is your business model? How confident are you that you know your customer segment? And how are you thinking about each of these pieces here? So let's talk about a few of them. The value proposition is really just a description of the customer problem. Like, what problem are you trying to solve, right? Is it a really, really serious problem? Or is it something fun? Are you trying to solve a problem that's just an inconvenience? And how are you going to capture those people, right? Netflix is probably one of the greatest examples of a company that has totally transformed a number of industries. Many people in this room, probably except for me and Joe, are too young to even remember Blockbuster. But for those of you that do, please make me feel good and warm. Oh, thank God. All right. So, Blockbuster was awesome. I remember going to Blockbuster, you'd walk up and down the aisles. It was like a small drugstore-sized place. You'd say, okay, I want to see the new Tom Cruise movie. What aisle's that? And you get the DVD or the VHS, and then you go up to the counter, you pay for it, and they say, how many days? And you say, well, it's Friday. I may not watch it tonight. 3 days. If you darn delivered it a day late, you got a fee. So we were always running back on like Sunday, sticking it in a little hole that was next to the door. So it would read the barcode. So it would tell us that we actually returned it on time. I mean, it seems mind-boggling. I try to explain to my kids this shit existed. It's like explaining to them a telephone attached to the wall, or that they have to get up and turn the channel on the TV. There's zero connectivity to that. But Blockbuster owned the industry, owned it. Nobody could touch them. They had the relationships with the studios. They had the relationships with the manufacturers of the pretty little, cases that these things came in. They had incredible power when it came to actually being able to copy and duplicate the quality of the movie onto thousands of these DVDs or VHS. They owned it. Netflix came in and said, wait a minute, this is kind of silly. Why do people have to go there? The internet's starting to get a little bit faster. It was still terrible compared to what we're used to today. The internet's getting a little bit better. I mean, people can't watch a movie online, maybe someday, but you know what? They can certainly pick a movie online. They can say, I want the new Top Gun movie, or I want the new Meryl Streep movie that just came out. Why do we need to send them a big packet with a DVD in it? All we actually have to do is mail them the DVD, which is as thin as an envelope. So Netflix came in and simply sold DVDs or leased or rented DVDs. And they also had the beauty of saying, send it back whenever the hell you want. Based on your membership, you get 5 a month or you get 7 a month. We don't care if you keep it for 2 months, you're paying the membership fee. So there was no late fees, which is the main thing that drove people completely bonkers about Blockbuster, was the late fees. But it was that convenience. I could watch it tonight, and then if I wanted to let my brother watch it tomorrow, he was fully able to do that, and the company didn't care. And we'll talk a little bit more about Netflix later, but just think about what they've become. They created a business model that crushed the biggest competitor in the world, put them out of business. And now they are competing with MGM, Disney, and the world's largest studios. They're competing with ABC, NBC, and CBS, and the world's largest television companies. It's mind-boggling. The ability to change your model is absolutely critical. And of course, market segmentation. Who is your target audience? They know who their target audience is. So they knew all we have to do is continually be a step ahead. As Wi-Fi continued to explode and become more ubiquitous, as the speed of internet connectivity started to explode, they said, why are we mailing DVDs? In major cities, people can just download the movie. And that's exactly what we did. It used to take 2 hours to download a full-length feature movie. It would eat up all of the space on your computer. Now, we download it in no time at all. It's irrelevant how much space it takes. It expires and disappears on our computer, or it's up in the cloud the entire time. Staying ahead of the curve, absolutely critical. A few other things on an academic sort of perspective, and then we'll talk about case studies, is think about the value chain structure. When you're thinking about your business model, I'm building something that I'm hoping is going to get in the hand of the consumer or the company, right? Because it's either B2B or B2C. It might be B2B2C. One of the investments we did last year was a B2B2C play. It was a banking as a service, UK-based company based in London called Omnio Global. They essentially are the back end of all of the small banks and credit unions in the UK. They have 130 credit unions that run on their platform. They don't even have to talk to the customer. So they are B2B, and then their client is B2C. So they are providing AML, KYC, all of the back-end regulatory stuff that a small to medium-sized bank can't provide. So we have to look at where are they in that value chain, and this is really what we're talking about here at the top, is what's happening in the value chain where you can actually have an impact. Because if you're selling something like custom-made furniture or art, the value chain's pretty small, right? It goes from the artist to probably the dealer who has a relationship with the gallery sells it to you or I. I mean, literally, you can map this out very quickly. But if you're selling technology, what is that value chain? That value chain might involve 200-300 different organizations. It might take, to build this silly little device, somebody built the screen, somebody built the plastic encasement, somebody built the battery, another company specialized in the Bluetooth. All of these things are part of the value chain. Where are you in the value chain? And this is so important for companies. When we talk to companies, here at MIT, where they're going to build the next transformational technology for, let's say, healthcare. Interesting. What does your technology do? Well, we give people the ability to sequence their own genome or get their own data from a sequencing. Or we do something similar to 23andMe, where you can see all of the things about your particular genetic makeup. All right. Well, who are you selling to? Where are you in the value chain? Are you going to go direct to consumer? Are you going to go through pharma companies? Is this going to be a prescription-only product? So understanding that value chain is super critical. And understanding how you add value to the value chain and work within it is critical as well, especially when you're dealing with technologies that are also, to complicate things, in a regulated environment. So if you're thinking about doing something in blockchain that's impacting fintech or health insurance, highly regulated environments, you have to think about, well, you can't just put this stuff up on the web and start selling it. We need to make sure that if we're selling auto insurance through this blockchain app or this technology, that we are licensed in that particular state. A good friend of mine, Eden Shokat from LF Ventures in Israel, they invested in a company called Lemonade. Lemonade completely transformed many aspects of the insurance industry for consumers. But they couldn't just do this based on, hey, I've got really cool technology. There's a massive problem here. I think I know where we fit in the value chain. They had to think about the externalities. What are the things we need to do to actually become relevant and compliant in order to be in that market? And of course, we know healthcare has its own challenges and others. And then finally, just sort of thinking about the revenue and the margins. You can imagine a Warby Parker as an example. When you're thinking about revenue margins and cost structure, you have a model that shows your gross profit is substantially higher than any of your competitors who have a brick and mortar store. But then how does that change when you yourself decide to have a brick and mortar store? How are you thinking about that transition? Think about Apple. Apple had the vision to actually build brick and mortar stores years ago. We take it for granted now. There's one in every major city, if not many of them. Apple didn't need to do this. They were following a very much an online model, similar to Dell Computer. Dell Computer was one of the first ever to say that you could go online and design your own computer. You want a 17-inch monitor with this much RAM, this much memory. You want a video card. You want the following. We'll build it. We'll send it to you. It was a custom-made, almost sort of boutique kind of a concept. Apple could have continued to sell online, which has great margins. They decided to say, no, this doesn't make sense. We're going to put stores, but we're not just going to put stores. We're not just going to sell through retail. We're not going to go to Best Buy. Maybe we'll do that someday. We're not going to go to Costco and BJ's. Maybe we'll do that someday. But we're going to create an experience for the end user. People are going to walk into this store that's going to be in pristine locations, glass, steel, very well-trained staff. They don't have to buy anything. They can come in and hang out like they're at a Starbucks. They can take a class on how to do graphic design, or they can buy an iPhone. Think about that. How do you sell that to your investors? How do you go to your board and say, we need about $500 million this year because we want to open 250 stores worldwide, and the stores may or may not generate much revenue, but they're going to create a user experience, a level of loyalty and commitment that keeps people coming back. Think about that. Microsoft has tried to do the same thing. I mentioned the Prudential Center earlier when we were talking about Warby Parker. They've tried to do the same thing. You walk by the Microsoft store that's inside the Prudential Center. It's empty 80% of the time. There's freaking nobody in there. It's right on the corner. I mean, they have an unbelievable location. You've got the Microsoft store right there on the corner. You've got Shinola watches. There's the beautiful atrium right there. It's practically empty. You leave the Prudential Center Mall, you walk across Boylston Street, and you walk into a 2-story Apple store, and the place is jammed. How is that? Because they had the innovative idea that people are going to buy our computers not because our computer computes, not because we have a prettier screen or a slightly faster hard drive or more RAM. This is an experience, and they've created a cult following. I mean, that's a business model. You can't think of that overnight, but if you're iterating constantly, it'll come. And finally, why do companies fail? Of course, iteration of the business model is a big piece of this. Common reasons that companies fail are always fascinating to me, and it never seems to change, no matter where we are in the technology world. I remember doing discussions in classes like this and working with entrepreneurs 10, 15 years ago, long before the world we live in now, which is sort of ubiquitous Wi-Fi and in a second, we can order something from Amazon at 10 o'clock in the morning and it arrives the same day at our house. This hasn't really changed. So yeah, a whole bunch of startups fail. That's great. We all iterate, we change, the strongest survive. But the reasons for failure, if you look at the biggest challenge, it's around lack of product market fit. Lack of product market fit, marketing problems, the biggest challenges. And of course, team is in there as well. So think about that. Had those companies had better business model, they would exist today. Why isn't Blockbuster in business today? They could have easily moved to the exact same sort of distribution philosophy and thesis that Netflix did. Mail DVDs to people's houses. Why do we have these stupid stores? But they refused to. They stayed entrenched in their belief that this would continue to work. Why? Because it worked the past 10 years. We're Blockbuster. Everybody knows our name. It changes very quickly. So there's always a fun cartoon. What if we don't change at all and something just magical happens? So that magical thinking that many management teams and boards have are often the death of companies. So I've given sort of the academic part of my discussion, and what I want to do is talk a little bit about real life case studies. And please, you guys have no MIT. There's no shyness here. Raise your hand if you've got a question, a comment, something I say just doesn't make sense, something you want to challenge, something that I didn't even think about when it comes to our examples, because there's so many more modern examples every day. I mean, the fascinating part is trying to prepare for this class. One of the things we have to think about is COVID, right? I've been doing this class for many years, and the world changed just because of a pandemic. Like, the pandemic changed the world, and then all of the world changed because of that. Think about the things that have changed in our lives because of the way we learned to interact during the pandemic. One of the industries that benefited better than any industry is the healthcare industry. If you went to your doctor 5 years ago, and I'm speaking from a US perspective, right? You went to your doctor 5 years ago and said, doc, this crazy shit of me driving to your office once a year for my annual physical, or every 6 months for a checkup, or for me to go to your office and sit in this dirty waiting room, it looks clean, but there's other sick people there, and you're gonna then tell me I have strep throat, which I kind of guessed before I got here. I think we should just do this kind of on Zoom. Your doctor would look at you like you were nuts. I don't get reimbursed for a Skype call with my patient. You need to come to the office. That was just how we operated. It never changed. And then COVID happened. And instantly, the regulators, the FDA, all of the groups at EMEA in Europe and others, the reimbursement profile changed dramatically. Holy shit, people can't leave. And we don't really want nearly 8 billion people in the world just skipping all their annual physicals and checkups and everything else. So the world changed very quickly. So sometimes we're forced to change our business model, and the ones that can do it succeed. And other times, you just have the type of management team that's always adapting to the new world. Think about the new world that we're in right now. Forget about COVID, right? We've all somehow survived that, come out the other side. We're now looking at a world where the tech industry is having the largest amount of layoffs it's had in 15 years, a decade, as long as many of you can remember. We should talk about that. Why are they doing that? What are the reasons and what are the ways they have to change their business model in order to accommodate this new world with higher interest rates, with a different kind of economy? How are companies adapting to this new world where people think, well, why don't I just work from home 2 days a week, maybe 3? You've got some traditional companies like JP Morgan and some of the others that Jamie Dimon's like ready to pull his freaking hair out. He's like, we have billion-dollar buildings in New York City. We really, really like camaraderie. We have a company culture. You're coming back to work or you can resign. Simple as that. And you have tech companies that are saying, yeah, we don't really see a need for people to have to be in the office. Think about that ripple effect. So there's a question in the back. Go ahead. Some was regulatory, some was reimbursement, some was the doctors not willing to change. They liked seeing 7 people sitting in their waiting room because they could actually keep busy all day. They weren't used to sitting in their office by themselves going, what time is my next Skype? Oh, I'm talking to Susan at 10:15. Right? But less so, you're right. But do you think that the regulated industries move faster or slower, or they have the same challenges as, let's say, unregulated industries? That's a very good point. I think you're absolutely right. If you're in a very highly regulated industry, you're not thinking about fighting the US government, right? If you're in telecom, you're in healthcare, it's not on your agenda like, hey, we've got a budget. Let's just fight the government on these things. I think you brought up a wonderful point. One company that did this and is still doing it in kind of the craziest way I've ever seen is Uber. I mean, Uber essentially did not take the conservative approach of let's go get all of the sign-offs, all of the approvals, the blessing from the Pope, and let's enter each city in a very organized way. They just came in with a sledgehammer and said, you can't compete with the app. So we've got drivers, we've got cars owned by the drivers, we put them through this process, boom, the app works, they get picked up. The taxi industry went completely insane. I mean, even to this day, there's still fights, but I think many of us can remember, it wasn't that many years ago that you literally had taxi drivers attacking Uber drivers. In France, there was riots between the taxi drivers and the Uber drivers. So they took an entirely different approach. They didn't care what the government said. They said the will of the people is going to prevail, and we don't really give a shit if we fit your perfect model for a taxi service, which was invented in probably the 20s or 30s. And if you take a look at that industry and that market, I mean, there was a lot of power and wealth and also political will coupled with criminal will in that industry. So many taxi associations in different states in the United States, New York being one of them, and in different countries, they're essentially run like a mob organization. You own that medallion. That medallion is everything. To get a medallion on the hood of your car for a New York taxi, at one point you could sell a medallion for, I forget what it was, some X multiple of the number of dollars you can make per year with the medallion. So there were organizations that owned 5, 10, 400 medallions. And they valued those. Can you imagine that all of a sudden another organization comes in and says, yeah, this medallion thing is cute, but we've got an app. So the fact that you, Mr. Driver, paid $250,000 for that medallion, and you're hoping to pass it on to your kid or maybe sell it for $400,000 when you retire, kind of irrelevant. I mean, that's incredible disruption. Not for the faint of heart. And I would love to have been in those meetings when the Uber CEOs and management team were convincing their board they had to put this much aside just for legal fees to fight the states and the cities and the countries that were protesting. And there's many places, as you guys know, as travelers, you can't even get an Uber. There's many countries and cities that it's impossible to get an Uber. If you land in France, in Cannes as an example, I was there 4 or 5 months ago for a conference. I land in Cannes, call an Uber, it brought me to my hotel. I needed to go from my hotel to the conference center, but we were in Monaco. Uber's illegal in Monaco. You cannot get an Uber or a Lyft or any of your other it just doesn't work that way. They have the taxi companies in that country, you get an app for them, that's how it works. If it's an hour wait, it's an hour wait. So Uber or Lyft can come in and drop off, but they can't pick up. They can't even pick up when they drop you off. It's not like they're coming 3 towns away into the city. They can't even pick up the moment they drop you off. If somebody's like, can you give me a ride? Massive fines. So think about that. That's crazy business models. That's crazy business planning. It takes a lot of guts to build a business like that. So let me jump to sort of case studies and things like that. I mean, here's a bunch of examples. And I'd love to hear your thoughts as to how you guys as consumers and entrepreneurs and business people think about the business models that you see with some of these really world-leading companies. How are you thinking about the way they've made a decision? And does that impact the way you're thinking about planning perhaps a startup here at MIT? Or if you joined a very cool company that just raised a bunch of venture capital and you're going in and marketing or sales, are you thinking in the back of your head, you know what, this reminds me a little bit of that model? Anybody want to volunteer? How are you thinking about your startup or your relationship with technology companies as it relates to what's already successful? Because that's what most of us do, right? If I'm describing something to somebody, I usually say, you know, it'll kind of remind you of that restaurant in New York. That's like the way it is, you know, or that experience was like this. And right now, I can't tell you, you know, how often we hear as investors, you know, we've got the, you know, the Airbnb model for this industry. You know, we've got the Airbnb for vacation homes, or we've got, you know, the Tesla model for this, right? Because we all want to feel as though what we're working on is associated with success. Whether it actually becomes successful or not, it's a different story. Any thoughts on this? When you take a look at this list, go ahead. That's right, but they are recording. Yep.
Shoes. I try talking to him.
Perfect. All right. Great.
Hello? Okay.
So repeat your question again. I think you were saying something about vertical farming, or?
Oh, yeah. So I believe you asked for an example where you relate a startup to a more famous startup.
Exactly.
So I was working for a vertical farming startup, and the way they marketed the company was the Tesla vertical farms. So we were selling Japanese strawberries, which were originally 6 strawberries for $50. So it was very much the market of creating a high brand product that's a luxury product to prove that there's a market for it, and then gradually bringing down the price, just like Tesla did.
That's fascinating. So they were essentially creating the Maybach, the Rolls-Royce, the Tesla of fruit. And was that through genetic engineering, or was it through the fact that it's a special farming procedure that's organic? I mean, what was sort of the mythical sort of marketing piece that helped people justify spending $50 for 6 strawberries?
So it was a special Japanese variety that is usually only grown in the mountains of Japan. And by using vertical farming, you can grow it within the US and also control the environment. So you can get a really high quality product that's consistent. And then you also have a lot more manual labor that can go into it to improve the quality of it.
That is fascinating. That really, I mean, it's kind of a mind-boggling sort of concept, right? You're thinking about a fruit that we all take for granted. We walk into the local Whole Foods and we pick up a container of them. But if it's something that specialized and you can claim ownership of that, and you have distribution channels, you can kind of charge what you want, which is a really very, very cool model. And the whole world of vertical farming on another note, we could run a class on that, sort of the changes in business models for farming, agricultural, fish farming, all of those industries have changed. It's kind of crazy. You think about the Netherlands, Denmark, like super, super small. They are one of the largest exporters of food in the world. And it's because they have figured out how to harness everything from organic farming in factories and warehouses to drip farming, being able to do these hydroponic. They've mastered the technology. It's worth Googling. It's absolutely fascinating. The amount of exports coming out of this tiny, tiny little country is more than countries 100 times its size. And it's because they adapted technology and started to export various fruits and vegetables. So interesting business model, very expensive startup costs, but ultimately you can wind up owning massive markets and bring the price down, as you said. There was another question, I think, right up here. Go ahead.
In Pakistan, we still are trying to build an electric motorcycle company. Pakistan has a huge motorcycle market. And so I think what we're doing is a mix of, a lot of what these companies did. So we're first trying to break in the market with higher priced motorcycles. We're owning our own retail as distribution as Tesla did. We're going direct to customers. And in terms of how we're marketing, we're trying to go to universities and trying that, that younger cohort of users that think will be early adopters like Facebook did. So there's a bunch of stuff that we're, basing ourselves off, from these companies.
That's quite interesting. I don't know if everybody heard that, but I mean, so you're essentially building a company that specializes in motor scooters, motorbikes, motorcycles.
Yeah.
Right? For an existing population that they already know that product.
Right? But they don't know. We're the first lithium-ion based electric motorcycle makers in Pakistan.
That's fantastic. So truly a domestic product that you own the whole food chain.
No, so the batteries, they come from China. But everything else that can be localized is localized.
Excellent. So that's fascinating because when we were talking before about supply chain and sort of where do you fit in the value cycle. So they're smart enough to figure out that, hey, we can't build these particular parts, maybe the motor, maybe the seat, maybe the whatever. So we'll get those from this market. We'll import it into our market. We'll do the assembly here, maybe manufacture or do something else local. And then we're in charge of everything direct to the consumer. And what about on the service side? Will you guys also manage some of that?
And the services, we're managing our own. We're trying to, own the second-hand market as well and the services as well. So, I mean, with the electric motorcycles, there's not a lot of servicing that you need, but whatever you need, goes through us.
Fantastic. Very creative. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, think about that. That is a hard business, right? I mean, when you're dealing with any particular product that's a physical product that has thousands of parts, but if you know your market, you've got the right management team that knows that market, they know the price point, they know how to deal with that consumer, and you're able to cut out a lot of that noise, that middleman, whether it be Honda or Suzuki or someone else shipping these things in at massive costs. I mean, that's an immediate bump in your total net revenue, net profits. Very good. Any other questions or comments before we bump along? All right, good. Let me just check my time. All right, we got a little bit of time left. So, one of the things you have to also think about is adoption curves, right? This is something that if you're over at the Sloan School, talk about all the time. So what is the adoption curve? What's the sales cycle coupled with the adoption curve? When do you reach sort of maximum density where your population actually really understands your product and it becomes ubiquitous? So all of these things have to be considered. And it's kind of funny when you think about, industries that we all take for granted. Think about each one of these, how long it took them just to get to a point of 50 million users. I mean, it's sort of crazy to think of the decades it took, especially for the top 4, just to get to 50 million users. 50 million is a tiny, tiny, tiny number. You've got internet companies. Shit, you have people on Instagram that have more than 50,000 followers, right? And they get them in months. It took decades to get technology that we take for granted to get to that point. Kind of funny, the bottom right-hand corner did it in 19 days. Can't imagine what that trend was, or they clearly figured out their market, and the internet made all of that possible, streaming video. But what you measure matters. Anybody heard of this book? Awesome. I mean, truly incredible book. I don't usually promote different books, but I'll tell you, when I see one that actually changes the way companies operate, we now give this to each of our CEOs and their management team. This was written by John Doerr. John Doerr is a partner at Kleiner Perkins Caulfield Byers, one of the single most famous venture capital funds in the world, responsible for Google and a whole series of others. Absolutely incredible book. I can't say enough about it. We have a question in the back.
We have a question from one of our Zoom attendees, Helen, who asks, how long would it take ChatGPT to reach 50 billion users, or generative AI in general?
That's a fantastic question. How long? 5 days. It's absolutely incredible. If it wasn't for the 60 Minutes episode on that, it might have taken 6. Does everybody know what we're talking about? Who can explain it? You can explain it better than me because you knew it was 5 days. Does everybody, who knows what this technology is? This is a technology that right now, 50% of us know what the hell it is, but 7-year-olds are going to know what it is by the end of this year. Every 7-year-old. You can literally go into this particular app and I can say, I need a 1,200-word article about environmental conditions in North Africa. Full stop. It will write the entire article for me. 1,200 words. It is mind-boggling AI, machine learning technology that is capturing all of the information it possibly can simultaneously from the web, using proper punctuation, the way that the tool Grammarly uses it. Who uses Grammarly here besides me? I love Grammarly. It's absolutely the coolest thing. I have it sitting on all the time. I open up a Word document, boom, Grammarly's there. It reminds me it should have been a comma. I mean, it's mindless ways of improving the way you communicate. Take that times 10,000. It's absolutely incredible. Do you have a number for us?
Not a number, but I know that they tested the software and it got an MBA from Wharton and got a 3.0 certificate. So you can get an MBA to be able to test it.
Yesterday they passed the physician test and medical.
Did they really? The technology passed the medical student exam. Incredible. And passed the bar as well. We are all going to become irrelevant. That is absolutely incredible. But Joe, we have to remember that's going to have to be something that we weave into the conversations next year. Where is that technology? Who's adopting it in such a way that they actually make money? Because it's kind of cool if I can say, write me a 500-page blog post on crime in small cities in the US, and it'll write it. But how do you make money from that? Where is the business? I mean, we're talking about business models here. how do I actually monetize that? How do we think about the industries we've already talked about, right? The consumer purchasing industry, medical and health, telecommunications, other industries. How do those industries leverage that ability to better communicate, identify information, and then monetize it? Who knows? But very, very cool. Great. All right, great. Great. You're getting your steps in.
Okay, this works. Awesome. Hello, everyone. I just had a question on the regulation of the space. Like, I'm a business analytics student at Northeastern University, and we talk a lot about the progression of AI. But we also see, 10 or 15 years ago with Facebook having exploded in the social media space, and the lack of regulation from the government really made the space very dangerous. And I see that happening again with AI. And without the regulation from the government with ChatGPT, like, where could it go? What limits people and what they could do with it? So I just think that's very scary in terms of AI and machine learning in that space. But with the lack of regulation and the slowness from the governments, it's just it's a danger more than it is value adding to society. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I appreciate the question because it is a profound question. There's certainly people out there that are far more skilled than I to talk about technology, ethics, governmental regulations, impact on society. But this is nothing new, right? So we're all shocked by the new technologies that enter our lives until we're not. We're all shocked that Amazon allowed us to get books to our house really, really fast. And they started selling tools and they started selling other crazy stuff. Now I can literally buy anything I want, and it probably will arrive within 48 hours. So we're shocked by technology and sometimes scared of it until we're not, because we get used to it. I mean, think about it this way. When the television first came out, as we were talking a little bit earlier here, it took a long time for adoption. Political people, academics, and others said, it is the death of the family and the death of books. Families will stop talking to each other because they're all going to be glued to the 4 channels available on TV. And why would anybody read? Well, certainly we knew it wasn't the death of the family or books. As a matter of fact, when we started sending emails, you think about the computer and the internet before Facebook, I remember people talking about you need to short sell anyone that is in the paper business. If they're in the printing business, the pulp business, the paper manufacturing business, any of that, everything is why would you mail a letter? Why would you print anything out? It's all going to be there on your screen. So there's of course fear and sort of anxiety sometimes when you see a new technology suddenly come in. And we find out that's not true. We actually use more paper now than ever before, because we can get so much information on the internet, and sometimes it's just easier to read than it is to read it on our iPad. Technology is always going to be ahead of regulations. It's just the nature of it, right? Because we don't have regulators sitting in academia. They're not at the MIT Whitehead Institute or the Broad or at the Koch Institute, sitting next to the genomics people, trying to figure out how am I going to regulate this new thing that you're going to create that ultimately becomes CRISPR, gene editing. No. It comes out, and then we figure out how to regulate it. And it's the same thing with most any technology that has impacted society. Seatbelts were not laws until probably, I don't even know, the 70s, the 80s. It's because we figured out that there's more people, more cars go faster, there's more deaths. Regulation comes in and it makes our lives sometimes a little bit better. But at the end of the day, technology is going to be ahead of regulation. The question is your company going to have an opportunity to capture a big piece of the market before it's entrenched with competitors and overly regulated? Think about that. Uber created an industry, and now regulation is coming into place. Bitcoin is a fantastic example of exactly that. It's still virtually an unregulated environment. Like, they don't know what to do with Bitcoin. And if you put 5 bankers in a room, CEOs of the top 5 companies, they would all argue differently as to whether this thing is actually a currency. Is this thing a storage of wealth, like a dollar or a yen or a pound or a euro? Or is it some sort of virtual fantasy? So time comes, regulations come in place. Yes, people do get hurt in the middle, right? I think certainly you saw that a lot around internet regulations in the very early days about what could be exposed on the internet. I think also, think about alcohol is a great example of this. Shipping alcohol from state to state was illegal in virtually every single state until somebody had the bright idea that you could buy wine or beer on the internet. And they started figuring that out. And regulation slowly comes in. So I think it's an exciting time, right? I don't view impending regulation as a negative. I view it as something that's going to come. The question is, are you going to be on the right side of it? And that's also why some of the best companies hire really great people that do surveys. They talk to the regulators. They say, this has never happened before. How many people in here are sort of healthcare, biotech, pharma, right? Have you heard of a company called Pear Therapeutics? Check this out. So we all know what therapeutics are, right? Therapeutics are medicines. They're doctors' prescribed medicines. They're not the stuff that you get at CVS over the counter. So a therapeutic is usually something that's gone through 10 years of regulatory trials and clinical trials that deal with human beings and lots and lots and lots of people and billions of dollars. And then all of a sudden this company had this idea, why don't we create a digital therapeutic? Why don't we create a prescribable technology that people with particular disorders, such as depression perhaps, can use on their phone? But it's actually not just an app you download, it is prescribed to you, which means it's reimbursable, it's FDA regulated. Mind-bending. Like, what do you mean a digital therapeutic? I remember the first time I heard this term, that doesn't even make any sense to me. What is a digital, how the hell do you do a clinical trial for a digital therapeutic? Well, it turns out it's a lot easier than doing a clinical trial for a real drug. Check out that company, Pear Therapeutics. They're based right here in Cambridge, not far from us at all. And they created the first ever FDA-approved digital therapeutic. How do you regulate that? So it's fantastic to be on the right side of it. And they spent a lot of time with the FDA and everybody else before they even thought about launching that product. All right, cool. Any other questions? We'll sort of wrap up. I think I'm running out of time. Right in the middle, Zoom question.
We have one from a Zoom attendee, David, who asks, what strategies do you have to help us find niche markets, and how are these different from finding traditional markets?
Well, that's a great point, because if you think about any company that started is probably falling into one of those categories, right? Like, I am going to build a better widget than the other guys that are already building widgets, right? Everybody's already watching movies at home. I'm just going to mail them the DVD instead of them going to Blockbuster, that kind of a thing, right? But then you have the other side of it, which is the niche market. The niche market are actually markets that very often are either underserved, right? Think about Africa as a great example of a niche market. There's diseases in Africa, because we talk about healthcare often here. River blindness is one of those. It's a tremendous niche market. Big pharma companies aren't going after it. Why? Because there's no reimbursement. They can't figure out how to even pay for the drug. Think about orphan diseases, where there might only be 250,000 people in the entire United States, or maybe 50,000 in the US, that have a particular disease. That's a niche market. Think about consumers. Think about the luxury industry. Somebody goes to the store, they need a watch, they wind up walking into a store and they wind up picking up a watch from Swatch or Seiko or maybe Shinola, right? A Detroit-made watch that is becoming very, very popular. Or they buy a Patek Philippe for $250,000. Or maybe they buy an IWC for $65,000. That's a niche market. What are you selling there? You're sure as hell not selling time. because they both do that. Both of them are going to tell you that it is 315. But one of them was made by hand and took 18 months. One of them was made by a machine. One of them was made of precious metals and springs and stones, and the other one was made of less so. So think about that niche. The strawberries are a fantastic example of that you shared with us earlier. I mean, that's a niche market. So that's when I very often think about, can this management team figure out how to get into that niche market? That is really the trick. So niche markets, whether they be small in the size, they might be global, but they're small, or they be luxury markets, those are tough ones to actually start a business, but it works. I'll give you one example we used in a prior class years ago, Joe. Remember the Nespresso and coffee machine examples? I mean, I can walk in and buy a coffee machine at, I don't know, Macy's. I can buy one on Amazon for $14. I could buy one for $900. I could buy an espresso machine that's advertised by George Clooney for a hell of a lot more than that. And I'm also going to leave it on my counter when I'm done having coffee because it becomes part of my kitchen. It's not like my little, one that I pull out of the Maxwell House one and I stick it in the cabinet before I go off to work. So Nespresso had the concept that we're not only going to make damn good coffee, but I don't know if that's exactly where they hold their highest value, but we're going to make one of the most beautiful coffee making, espresso making machines. People are going to put this on their counter. They're going to pay $1,500 for this. We're going to have stores in the most upscale mall. If you've been in Singapore, the Ion Mall has an Nespresso shop there that is massive. It's just comical. I mean, it's like an Apple store for Nespresso machines. They go to the ceiling and they're in every possible color. And people walk into this machine. You're nodding, you know this, right? I'm not making this up. Yeah, exactly. So you're from Singapore. You think to yourself, who could open a retail location in the Ion Mall and sell coffee machines? That's a definite way to spend a lot of money on marketing. But they can do it because you're charging $1,500 for a machine. You can hire George Clooney for the first 3-4 years of the launch of your company to do that as well. So that's another great example of a niche market. Other thoughts, questions, comments? All right, up front.
How do you know if your business model is going to be adapting? I mean, how long will it take? How can you plan and project that?
Yeah, that's a great, his question was, how do you know if your business model is going to take, or how long do you wait as you're testing out the new business models? And that's really easy if you're a big company, because you hire focus groups and you hire companies like McKinsey and Bain and BCG to do analysis of the market and the trends and the pricing and the behavior. But as a startup, it's really hard. You need to do really guerrilla marketing, which is actually the name of a decent book too. You need to get out there and knock on doors and talk to customers and say, how much would you be willing to pay for this? And if we did this, where do we fit in the value chain? I mean, it's a challenge, but as an investor, I can tell you the main answer is it all depends how much money you have. If you're a startup that's raised $3 million in your series, whatever, your seed round, you might only have 10% of that allocated to figure out different markets. So you better choose very carefully. If you just raise $75 million, it's a different ballgame. You can try 3 markets at the same time. But it's a great question. And a lot of that depends on really what are the trends in the marketplace and what are the expertise of the management team. I sure wouldn't want to have a great technology product and a whole bunch of managers that all came out of B2B companies and they decided, you know what, we're going to sell direct to consumers. I don't care how good that product is. If they don't have that expertise, the probability of success is less. So management team, capital, market trends, those type of things. And I'll sum up some things here really quick. Going back to this book, which is Measure What Matters, John from Kleiner Perkins, he didn't invent the concept of what's called OKRs. Who's heard of OKRs? All right, some Sloanies here, Harvard students. So OKRs are sort of an acronym for outcomes and key results. And a guy from Intel, Andy Grove, created this concept to drive Intel from the earliest days to become the world's largest semiconductor company. And he always believed that outcomes and key results needed to be measured for every role in the company, every position, whether it be sales and marketing, distribution, vice president of finance, you name it. And then ultimately, John, who worked for Andy for a long period of time, he adapted that, and he actually brought those principles to many of his investments, including Sergey Brin and teams at Google and elsewhere. And because they adapted and adopted those principles, and they adapted the way they operate to actually measure what matters, the companies, he said, instantly became more successful. Now, instantly might be a period of 1 or 2 years, right? This isn't something that happens in a week seminar. But they became substantially more successful than those companies that couldn't figure out what to measure and who to measure. And the most successful companies in the world measure everything. If you can't measure it, they say, it doesn't matter. So I don't want to hear some nonsense that you're really feeling good about that meeting, or I really feel good about our new entry in this particular part of Asia. Can you measure it? So one example is when you take a look at companies, what's important? A company like Intel, they're actually per employee, if you took the number of employees times about $500,000, that would pretty much equal the revenue of the company. And they have a lot of employees. You take a company like Apple, $1.9 million per employee in the company. Which company is more successful? It's hard to say, actually, because I can tell you, Andy Grove, who founded Intel, he has a lot less employees than Apple, but these are really highly paid people. These are super highly paid people, so he doesn't have a lot of them. Whereas Apple has a lot of people, but also very expensive products. So it's very interesting. You have to think about that dynamic. Apple can charge $1,200 for an iPhone, but most mobile phone companies charge $200 for an iPhone. So that's why Apple can make $1.9 million per employee, even though they have more employees, than perhaps a smaller, or many of the other Nokias or the other type of phone companies that are out there, Samsung, that are selling their phone for $200. So they can get a premium, they can support a lot of staff, but they still have ridiculous margins per employee. And this is just one really crazy measurement. This may be relevant in some businesses, but not in others. Another way is a fun one that we saw out of Title Max was profit per second. If you look at some of the most profitable companies like IBM, others, AT&T, every second they make a certain amount of profit. So these are just fun ways to think about measuring. So I encourage you to think about measure what matters. And I'm going to summarize this here and then open it up to any other last questions and then make way for your next speaker. So these are the key ingredients when you think about a business plan and the business model within that plan. Are you answering these questions? And if you don't know the answer to these questions, that's totally cool. You can just ask one of the AI tools that we talked about earlier, it'll probably tell you the answer. But you ask your peers, you ask the people that are in the industry. You know, one of the greatest things I learned very early in my career of running my first company, which is the one I shared with you earlier, Molecularware, was bring people around you into the company, such as advisors. You don't have to put them on the payroll. But these are people that have the gray hair, that have the experience, that have been through different cycles within the market, but they just have a view into the market that you could never have at 25 or 30 or 35 or at a younger age. And we would bring advisors in and we would literally just ask them the silliest questions when it came down to what they deal with on a day-to-day basis. But it helps shape the way we think. So it's okay not to know the answers. It's sure as hell not okay to guess. So survey the clients, survey the best people in the industry, ask lots of questions, and I wish you all a lot of luck as you continue your journey in entrepreneurship and elsewhere. Thank you all.